longest time, I couldn't put a name to who I was. I didn't have an image of anybody else who was like me, and it was torturous.
If I saw myself somewhere, anywhere, as a teenager, I know that I would have saved a lot of money on my therapy sessions.
When I was young and seeing films for the first time that had gay and lesbian characters, I felt at home.
So I would just scan the shelves of Blockbuster, just looking for anything with like 2 men hugging or 2 women. And anything I could find, I would get.
We all understand the same stories. You know, where you're sticking, whatever you're sticking, in whoever you're sticking it, doesn't really matter.
I think films do make a difference.
Yeah.
I think they get under people's skin and they reflect our lives and our experiences back to us.
I'd love to see a movie that reflects that world that we live in.
That would be nice to see, if only it weren't a sin. Damn it.
Many of us grew up during a period when there was a de facto mainstream media blackout on our lives. Stories about us were not allowed to be told, and literal queer representation was completely forbidden.
In the post-war period, it's hard to really talk about a gay and lesbian cinema, and it's even hard to talk about a gay and lesbian audience. They're not going to gay films. Those don't really exist. People couldn't sit around watching Queer as Folk or The L Word. So instead what you have are, well, it's sort of a gender split. I think that the gay boys are sort of watching physique films and fantasizing about bodies and not wanting sand kicked in their face. And the girls are busy at the drugstore buying pulp novels with kind of dreamy covers. And so I think that people's fantasies are being fed, but their identities haven't yet really begun to form in what we think of as a modern sense. And maybe the place that you see some change starting to happen in Hollywood isn't out of the studios at all. It's in maybe the bedroom of this boy who's growing up in Hollywood, and his name's Kenneth Anger. And at the end of the 40s, he stays in his bedroom and fulfills his fantasies by making fireworks. If you look at fireworks, it's not that far from a physique film. It's these kind of muscle guys. They're in their Navy uniforms. It becomes, in a way, the kind of precursor to a whole American art cinema tradition. And it's almost a kind of bridge film for a gay sensibility. Censorship cases are being fought over pornography in the 60s, but they're also being fought over much smaller films that would seem to be much less threatening. And then because you have supposedly an orgy on screen in Flaming Creatures, and inappropriate body parts are being juxtaposed to inappropriate body parts. And that's enough in 1964 to get you arrested.
You have to remember how much fun it was to see those movies, because the police would raid it and arrest the audience. I mean, imagine going to the movies today and being taken away in a paddy wagon. That didn't happen to me, but it did happen.
I remember sneaking with my best friend in his car and driving out to a remote area of Houston where I was from, where they were showing an Andy Warhol series. This was kind of an art house that was way in the north end of town, which nobody paid any attention to. I lived very far away, so I knew no one would have seen me go there.
First kind of Warhol queer film was Blowjob, you know, it was just a close-up on a guy's face while he was getting a real blowjob. Not only is it art, but it's queer and it's erotic. That was really the beginning of a queer sensibility in a big way, in the the public's imagination, you know, in a cultural way, was Warhol.
Before Andy, gay men were kind of square in the movies. You had hip gay people that were on speed and listened to rock and roll and opera and took diet pills, and, you know, and that's the kind I like still.
Especially during the years of the production code, European cinema is where Americans turned for sex. And fortunately, gay and lesbian sexiness was not an exception. A lot of films came over that challenged all kinds of things, including a kind of homophobic lens on life. The gay and lesbian filmmakers became especially important in that period before Stonewall, like Derek Jarman, like Pasolini, like Visconti, like Fassbinder. Somebody who becomes very important is Chantal Akerman, the Belgian-French filmmaker who's still making films now. Her first feature film was called Je tu il elle, and it was an avant-garde film of a love affair between two women, in bed and out of bed.
It must be a 10-minute scene between these two women in black and white, pretty much static camera, wide camera, and these women, it's as if they're having oral sex, but it's almost like, totally like they're gymnasts. But what that scene does, and why that scene is so brilliant, is that it makes you aware of how every sex scene you've ever seen is totally conventional.